Hey, good morning, everyone. It is 10:30 a.m., so we will start this public hearing. On behalf of the Hawaii Housing Finance and Development Corporation of Hawaii, I'd like to welcome all of you to this public hearing. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is David Oy. I am the finance manager here at HHFTC, and I'll also be acting as today's hearings officer. The notice of public hearing was posted statewide on September 26th, and the notice of public hearing was also posted on the HHFTC website. So in order that this hearing may accomplish its purpose as effectively as possible, we are asking your cooperation with the following guidelines. When you're recognized for testimony, please speak clearly, state your name and whether you are speaking for yourself or as a representative of an agency or organization. Please make your statements as brief and concise as possible to give everyone an opportunity to state your views. If you have any written statements you'd like to place on the record, please provide them to any of our staff here. If you are able to, try to keep your testimony to less than 10 minutes if possible, so that everybody may have an opportunity to share their views. We do have a sign-up list. We have people in person as well as online that are joining us for testimony, so I will recognize you when it is your turn. Staff is here to take comments. We're not here to respond directly to any inquiries on any testimony or questions. If you have any further questions, feel free to email staff at any time. Thank you. So I'll now begin taking testimony in person. I have Mo Mohana from High Ridge Costa.
Good morning, Mo Mohana with High Ridge Costa, affordable housing developer. Thank you for the opportunity to come here today and provide comments on some of the changes that were proposed by staff. We have submitted written testimony. We did email it in yesterday. If you'd like another copy of that, we'd be more than glad to do so. I'm not going to touch on everything we submitted in the testimony out of respect for the members here and the audience. I do want to start with a big picture concept that preparing to submit an application in a typical calendar year, February, requires a lot of work, including entitlement and readiness. And typically, projects take us anywhere between 3 to 5 years to get them ready for submittal. When we tie up sites, when we evaluate them, when we assess them, it is based on a written set of rules, which tells us that the site can score or the site is feasible, what's the period of time we need to work with the land owner that we're working with. So anytime there are proposed changes, good or otherwise, that affect any development project pipeline, we recommend that a reasonable period of time be given for those rules and regulations to be adopted. While we think there's a lot of merit in a number of the items that are presented, adopting them for a 2025 application would derail a number of projects that are in the pipelines that we and other developers have been working on. So we do ask for a grace period of a 2-year on some of the major changes. Having said that, main items that I would like to touch upon today is project readiness. We believe project readiness should hold firm at a minimum 201H approval as was changed and adopted by the board for these applications is critical. It gives a certainty that the project has been approved, number of units, the parking, and a slew of conditions of approval that would affect the cost of the project. So we strongly recommend no pullback on project readiness happens. The other one is the development costs. The development costs are a tricky one because it differs from product type to product type, and it differs from location within one island, let alone location from one island to another. Projects that have offsites versus non-offsites. So it's a pretty difficult one. Also, when we are looking at and preparing an application, in order to get our application ready, we are months ahead of time preparing our numbers and our costs and our applications. So having costs being presented 45 days prior to an application due, I would probably say our staff would walk out on me if I told them we're changing the entire application 45 days before it's due, redo the reports, redo the studies, redo the numbers. So I caution this one, and I think this is an item that needs further discussion. How do we address different product types based on locations? Is there an allowance for a podium versus non-podium, for an on-grade versus non-on-grade, high-rise versus not So I think this is an item that needs to be considered quite a bit more. On energy efficiency, we respect and think it is important to have energy efficiency. We, as a developer, make sure that our projects are certifiable, meaning they meet all the requirements of a certain LEED level, whether it's silver or above. But the actual certification to get that plaque to post imposes timelines that we have to comply with that are sometimes, affect our timeline, and more importantly, cost. The idea is we want the energy efficiency standards. We're 100% in support, but as long as we can provide third-party certification that they've been adhered to, I don't think the LEED identification is necessary, but to be certifiable. Percentage of targeted units, we definitely are seeing that in the market, there's demand for lower affordability. So I commend the staff for looking at that. One thing I do caution is we're all trying to balance the bond asks and the RHRF asks. Steeper level of affordability is an automatic reduction in NOI, causing a larger gap. So that is a tough one. We ran a sample pro forma for a most recent development that we just closed on this year. And if we apply the new proposed rents, it's an $11,000 increase per unit. So multiply that by a large size project, it's a significant increase in RHRF. So this is more of a social goal, but we got to balance if we're trying to reduce ask versus increase ask and what is needed here. The loan repayment one, that one we were asking for more clarity, because it is a long-term perm source that makes the capital stack work, without which the projects are not feasible. So we weren't able to really comment very well on that one. We're asking more clarity in what is being asked here. Trying to go through the list quickly. Amenities, one thing we'd like TOD to be added to the amenities. I think that's one of the focus of the state. That's something that should be added. But that's one of the items that we believe there needs to be also some accommodations. I've seen it in other states where if it's on neighbor islands where some of these services, that proximity, there are longer distances for those neighbor islands. We are concerned with some of the distances that have been placed even for Oahu on some of these projects. But this is a very good example of a project that's already in the pipeline for 3 to 4 years. When this becomes a requirement, we actually start with the least common factor of what these amenities are and look for sites within that area. So that really changes site selection significantly. It needs to be phased in. But one thing I would caution, we've seen this apply, and it resulted in a concentration of projects. I'll use the example of a public library. Within a 1 mile distance, every landowner for a public library knew what an affordable housing tax credit developer is because everybody was pinging the least common denominator. So let's be careful not to cause that concentration. Point deduction, I understand staff's concern. The only thing I ask, again, that the criteria be very clearly laid out what that is, because that is impacting the developer's ability to do future business when they have negative points being allocated to a future application. I also would ask that it's for applications submitted after this adopted, not retroactively. But this is a criteria that needs to be made very clear. Otherwise, it's very risky, and it would just cause much strife that is not necessary between the developer and HHFDC. As to the areas there was what happens when it's double-sided. The opportunities and the poverty, the language as written seemed to direct them more to poverty areas than to other areas. So whether we misread the language or basically the underserved areas was directing it towards the underserved areas the way it's written. Same thing with the census tracts and the concentration of those in the lower incomes. We've seen that language in other QAPs, but it goes the opposite. So we just were asking what is the intent here. Last one is the developer fee. That is something that's come up a number of times. There is what I believe is a very good system to reduce the developer fee. And if you look at the amount of developer fee for the project, in most cases, there is a deferral of the developer fee. So it's not that we're realizing the maximum allowed under the current score. Number two, nearly without exception, we see that the developer fee deferral increases at close. Nearly without exception, we see that developer fee, even deferral, increases. Again, I'm talking about deferral, I didn't say it clearly, at perm loan conversion. So the cash portions, it's not the whole fee, which is typical, and it's used by both construction and perm lenders and tax credit investors as a second contingency. When the contingency is used up due to any problems in construction increases, delays, timelines, lease up, then the second contingency is that fee. And they come and look at it, and when they see a fee that is low in cash and low in amount relative to the size of the project. Well, we've also seen the effect of limiting fee in other states is as a developer, you came and take a look at the fee and you say, okay, anything beyond that number of units, we're not getting compensated for that risk. And we've seen it drive toward lower unit counts and density. We ran an example on some of the projects it would drive the average project and the projects we're seeking down to 75 units. Not exceed that cap. This way you're kind of using the number of units. So we think that's counterproductive. Driving the number of units down, cost efficiency during construction, cost efficiency during operations is of concern. So again, I think a lot of thought has been put in this by staff, and I commend them for the work and what they have put here. I think additional discussion is warranted. Appreciate more input from stakeholders as some of these points are clarified and repeated. And I also ask for the grace period in giving us the time, if you're going to adopt these, to be able to adjust our pipeline. So we're asking for a 2-year adoption period on most of them. Thank you. And if you have any, no comments, please.
Thank you, Mo. Appreciate it. Next to testify, we have Jim Weglarz from Michael's organization.
Aloha and good morning. On behalf of Michael's Development, my name is Jim Weglarz. I'm a regional vice president of development. So thank you for the opportunity to submit comments to the proposed 2025 QAP. We have also submitted written testimony. However, we want to highlight at least 4 elements to be discussed and echo some of Mo's comments here. First and foremost, there was a suggestion to do a plan and cost review for the projects, which I've seen in other states, and it can be beneficial. However, it should be aware that this does give additional costs to the developer upfront, which provides a risk, obviously, for cost. But also, in other states, I've seen this third-party cost be much greater than, say, your market study or your other studies that are required. So that's something to be considered. Also, with regards to the plan and cost review, it's a requirement of any syndicator and lender. It'll be done at a later stage. So doing it at this early stage may be contradictory to their study, which they may do a year and a half later. So that's also something to be considered. To echo something that Mo said, to implement this change for an application that's due in 3 or 4 months doesn't seem practical. So we would also ask for phasing it in either in a year or 2. That might be a easier suggestion for the QAP. With regards to developer fees, our second point, is right on. When you start lowering the fee, a lot of things happen. We're for at least a per unit cap fee instead of a percentage, or instead of a gross cap fee like it's been suggested, for a couple of reasons. Projects in Hawaii typically are quite large, at least the ones that we've worked on. And when you start capping the fee at $3.5 million, contingency is lost, as Mo mentioned, but also the incentive, if we're putting pre-development dollars upwards of $4 or $5 million before we get to closing and only make $3 to $4 million, it's going to greatly lower the field that's going to come in to do deals in Hawaii. And I think ultimately the goal is to build more affordable housing and not less. And so I think in the end, this would be an end result of less affordable housing being built in Hawaii. And also, personally, this is my own comment with regards to, for Michael's, is that, elaborating the developer fee payment policy requirement, I would love to see that in the QAP. I understand the overhead, the way it works in Hawaii. It's my first year working here, so I understand how it works now, but it hasn't really been elaborated within the QAP. So it's almost like a black box that I have to learn through experience, but I don't have experience. So for myself, it would be great to see it either in a QAP or in some sort of underwriting guidelines that kind of outlines the typical percentages of the payouts, whether it's at initial closing or later and so on. So it's a unique element to the way that the program is implemented here in Hawaii. I think that would be beneficial to all developers, not just the mainland developers, to elaborate that. So project readiness, our third point, which is a great job of talking about it. We also are in favor of keeping the 201H approvals being a threshold because that is entitlements. There's a risk that if you don't have it, you may not get it later. As well as everyone knows with 201H, the exemptions that are, come with it are very essential to the project. And that would be a risk that you would not have that coming in. And then if you award it and somehow don't get it, it would greatly impact the project and not make them feasible. We do believe that if project readiness is a threshold at some point, whether this QAP or a future QAP, it would be greatly important to us developers to understand what the thresholds are. To set up a point system where maybe you could understand that permits would be the maximum, for example, and maybe it's submission of permits or some elaboration within that category instead of a 60-point category that we have no idea how to achieve those points. And then I will caution that if you do push folks to get permits or to have permit submission, that is a great burden on the developer to get to that point prior to an application. And again, that becomes that play with the developer fee. Am I going to put in $2 million or $3 million to get drawings to a certain level? And then maybe you don't have an award. So it puts us in a position that we don't like to be put in. We want to basically know we have an award and then we can full speed ahead to the next level. So I think thinking through the delineation of project readiness throughout the process is important and also give us time to phase that in. As we've mentioned, Mo mentioned, in 3 months, if we have projects that have been working on for 3 years, but now we have to get them to permit or whatever level of readiness in the next 2 months, that's pretty infeasible. Last but not least, we wanted to talk a smaller point on the preliminary engineering report. Maybe a good idea. I'm not really sure what HHFDC is going to do with the report. Because at that early stage, or even if it's an advanced stage, whether would question because of the cost, again, you're doing a geotech, which can be $50,000 to $150,000. Again, putting the burden on us to put out money for a situation where we don't know if we're going to get an award. So I think you have to kind of roll that into readiness perhaps, or consider what you're going to use the geotech report for. And if you're going to use it for looking at structural questions that you have, there are other people down the road that will ask those questions. So maybe that's not a role that HFDC wants to get into in terms of design. So I want to thank everybody, and the staff has worked really hard to make changes. I was on your side of the table 10 years ago working for state agency in Illinois, so I know how difficult it is to make changes. I appreciate the suggestions and I appreciate my opportunity to present on behalf of Michaels. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
There's a problem. People aren't able to dial in. And they're saying they're receiving comment that IT is working on it, but there's testifiers that want access and are unable to access.
Yeah, so we received a comment that there's difficulty with the dial-in right now. That is being worked on, but we will make sure that we leave time at the end to have that resolved and address that before the hearing is over. Thank you very much.
So you can't hear the.
I can't hear you there. Yeah, moving on to our next testifier, we have Scott Settle from ahead.
Hi, good morning. Scott Settle. I'm a director at the Ahead Foundation, an affordable housing nonprofit. I'm also speaking on behalf of myself as an attorney in the affordable housing industry. I've been practicing almost 35 years in affordable housing my entire career. And I know that you guys know this, and perhaps some of the folks on the line know it as well, but affordable housing development is a really, really complicated and hard job to do. You guys have a huge part of that job, but development involves not just the planning of it and tying up the land, but figuring out the financing. But there's tax credit financing, there's DERF or there's a rental housing revolving fund financing, which you guys help. There's oftentimes HUD financing, there's Section 8 financing. There's there's investors, not just federal tax credit investors, but state tax credit investors. And the programs are slightly different. And so what a developer struggles with is pulling all of these folks together, kind of like herding cats to a closing table to meet all of their requirements and their restrictions. And the QAP is just one very important part of it, but it's one piece of it. And so I think what's really important for us to do is before making major changes to the QAP that folks have been relying on, oftentimes for years in their pipeline, is to talk about the changes like you are now and really sit and listen and then try to work collaboratively with the development industry to figure out how it is that we're going to incorporate all the policies and the changes that HHFDC wants while still allowing projects to be feasible. I really strongly suggest that a collaborative team of folks get together and talk about it, and you spend 6 months working through this, and then come up with changes that maybe can be implemented next year. And also, like Mo was saying, for the folks that have spent millions of dollars and thousands of hours getting projects done and in the pipeline, you phase in some of these things over time so that all that work doesn't go to waste. Because they do a really good job, and I work with a lot of folks in this room, and I know how hard they work to get, and I know how hard you guys work to get good housing built for Hawaii. So that's really my main point, and I caution you folks to take some time and really think through this before implementing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. We're going to pause for a moment to see if we can resolve some of our technical issues. So we'll be back in a few moments. It's just two people on the. My colleague's getting work. It's getting done. Okay. That's where the region's capacity is.
Okay, then we'll go.
You guys got a good. So you guys come now. Follow. Right. Yeah.
Polly. President, goes about make Polly Watson Drive, aging down.
Is it busy?
I don't know if it's like a capacity or not. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's activated.
I don't think you guys can do it.
At least pretty far, right?
Generation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these. It's business. This will be some years.
Chairman, continue again. Thank you, everyone. Sorry about the delay. We're back. Hearing will resume. Our next testifier is Sandra Oshiro, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to comment on the proposed 2025 qualified application plan. My name is Sandra Oshiro, and I coordinate the Hawaii Young Adults in Transition, or HYAT, a support group for families with young and older adults on the spectrum, autism spectrum. In full disclosure, I also serve on the board of the Pacific Housing Assistance Corporation, a nonprofit affordable housing developer serving kupuna, working families and people with disabilities. Originally, I'm speaking solely on behalf of Hyatt and family. The QAP is an important document setting policy for the distribution of millions of dollars in federal low-income housing tax credits. The credits help developers finance affordable housing, but they are limited, and as such, the credits should, in a just society, support the most vulnerable in the community. These include those with disabilities. Unfortunately, the latest draft of the QAP represents a step backward in this area. As presently worded, the QAP section on special housing needs would significantly narrow housing eligibility for individuals with disabilities. They would need to receive disability-related income to be eligible for LIHTC housing. However, not all individuals with disabilities receive income from sources such as SSI and SSDI. Many individuals with significant disabilities do not receive assistance from these government programs for various reasons, such as an inability to navigate a complicated application system. The current QAP draft removes eligibility for individuals with disabling conditions who require independent living services to maintain housing or live outside of institutions. It also excludes people with disabilities who face challenges finding safe, affordable, and permanent housing. No explanation has been provided for these changes, and we are deeply concerned about their immediate and long-term effects. We respectfully urge HHFDC to consider maintaining this broader definition of disability, ensuring that all individuals in need of shelter remain eligible to apply. After consulting with Dantry Bartolus, Executive Administrator of the Hawaii Developmental Disabilities Council, we support her recommendation to adopt the following definition. For the purposes of housing eligibility under the QAP, a person with a disability is defined as an individual with a physical, sensory, cognitive, intellectual, or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. This definition includes, but is not limited to, individuals with permanent, temporary, or episodic conditions that impact mobility, cognition, communication, or self-care. Proof of eligibility can include medical documentation, self-certification of functional limitations, or documentation from a healthcare provider, social service agency, or relevant authority, and is not limited to those receiving federal disability benefits. This definition aligns with Americans with Disabilities Act and the Fair Housing Act, which do not limit federally supported housing to individuals receiving disability benefits. Indeed, such a restriction may run counter to federal laws that prohibit discrimination against those with disabilities. And to our knowledge, individuals with low incomes, for example, are not required to show they receive federal benefits to qualify for federally supported housing. We look forward to working together to achieve the goal of housing the neediest in our community. Societies are judged by how they treat their most vulnerable members, and Hawaii, land of aloha, should not be an exception. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandy. Thank you, Hyatt. Next to testify, we have Dean Sakata on behalf of Mark Development.
Thank you for this opportunity to testify. Dean Sakato with Mark Development. I want to start off by commending staff. I read through all the testimony posted on your website, and I think you guys did a marvelous thing with the landing page. And, it's encouraging for me, having sat in your seats before, that, you received so much public testimony from a very diverse group of stakeholders. And, that input from the stakeholders, really shapes the QAP policies of the state, because that's what the IRS intended. You have a flexible, very, very responsive program to current needs, rather than going through legislative processes to define what the policies are. So I just want to start off by commending staff. So, onto the meat and potatoes. So, I heard testimony from some of my fellow developers before me, and they kind of stole my thunder, but that's fine. But one thing I want to touch upon is your geographic priorities seem to be very biased toward urban communities with, factors like your zip codes, right? And especially on the neighbor islands, and having additional points for proximity to services, shopping, and so forth. There's a need for affordable housing in our rural communities, but they're rural because they don't have immediate access, right? They're not within 1 mile. I mean, that's a fact. And that's something, I guess, I asked the question, is this a priority of HHFDC moving forward to only fund urban projects or prioritize urban projects or TOD projects? Because, much of the neighbor islands are rural. So that's a question I have on a policy level. I think the second thing that kind of stood out is your local government support and your $50,000 threshold per unit threshold on to get scoring. And if you multiply that by, let's say, 100 units, right? That's $5 million. Okay. Have you guys looked at how many of the counties have those resources available? Because I kind of look at the home program, AHF program, and those programs have received steady funding, but haven't increased significantly over the last 15, 20 years, right? And that's been their the county's primary source of funding for our affordable housing, as well as, they have some local programs to provide funding, but I think that threshold may be too high, something that you may want to look at. And, in closing, right, I just kind of am concerned of the timing, right? February application and wholesale changes. And admittedly, it took me about a week and a half to really digest what these changes were, because there were so many, and then try to figure out how to work with it. What is it? What's happening? What are the dynamics? How do they interact? And how does it affect scoring? And then I put myself in your shoes, and it's like, if I were working there, how would I implement it? And do I have enough time? Because you're looking at at earliest November board meeting to approve the QAP. And then you have all these changes, and you have to implement all this, hopefully by December. So I'm sure you folks have gotten to work on it, but that's not much time, because for us preparing applications or considering applications to submit, we've been working on these projects a year, sometimes 2 years before we submit an application. And we want to know whether we're competitive or not. And I don't think there's enough time for us to digest, even after the QAP is published, how competitive we are and how this is going to be implemented. And that's really a concern from me as a developer. All I have today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dean, for your testimony. Next, we have Chairman Cully Watson from the Department of Hawaiian Homelands.
Morning, my name is Carly Watson, Chairman of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. I'm here basically to give you a heads up on our situation, and very, very pleased at what's being proposed here on the QAP amendments, how it will impact our program. A little bit of history, this program's been around for over 100 years and has created a little over 10,000 homesteads. About 8,500 are residential. So when you look at the numbers over a 100-year period, it's pretty pathetic. And we are fortunate that recently the legislature, through Act 279, made $600 million available to our program, which is great. But in reality, we have 29,000 on our wait list, which would cost us roughly $6 billion to really accommodate all the people on the wait list, including not even addressing those that we anticipate signing up once they see what's happening in the program. So it's a real challenging situation. I think obviously we need alternative funding sources. That's where HHFDC really comes into play. There's a little bit of a history in our program with the use of HHFDC. Not only do we acquire some of your lands in the master plan communities, but we've done, and I'd have to thank Greg Watasi's development group in putting together that whole Lima Lima project, where they showed us the way in using tax credits, various other funding sources to provide 72 beautiful 3-4 bedroom homes that after the 15-year compliance period was transferred to them. We're taken off the wait list. Now, when we look at our wait list, the majority of the people on the wait list are below 60% AMI. So this tax credit approach really comes into play. Again, it is a competitive process. So whatever additional points under the QAP process we can get would be very, very helpful. With respect to our strategic plan, we're anticipating doing about 25 projects in the coming years. About 12 of them we anticipate going after low-income housing tax credits. We're also expanding our options for our beneficiaries and starting to get into the Kupuna housing situation with Luna Lilo Homes. So that's another anticipate product that's going to need access to our the tax credits program, the DERF, the rental housing program, all these good funding sources that you folks have. So we're very supportive of what you guys are doing. I think that not only does it give us some advantage for our projects, but I would say that it also encourages developers out there to seriously consider working with us in maybe participating in partnership or in anticipation of maybe making their project available for us when there's a conversion, which would really assist in getting people off the wait list. But I really need to emphasize the fact that when you look at our program, I hope you guys don't consider us as a typical developer. We're not a developer. We're an arm of the state that is tasked with a fiduciary duty, and under this Hawaiian Homes Commission Act, which is a part of our state constitution. And the fact is we became a state with the assumption and acceptance of this responsibility to take care of the program, to take care of our beneficiaries. With the situation where every day people are dying on our wait list, we need to accelerate. And one of the things why I'm here with this program is a very, very passionate thing for me, but it's also an acknowledgement and as well as a recognition that things need to be moved along quickly. I think the only way we're going to make it move along quickly is we get these alternative funding sources, because the 600 million is not going to go far. Like I said, we need additional funding sources. And with these changes in the QAP, I think that'll help facilitate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Watson. I'd like to ask that all participants on the phone, can you please check your phones to make sure you're muted, so we're not getting additional noise while parties are here to testify. Thank you. Next up to testify, we have Craig Watase from Mark Development.
Morning. Craig Watase, I'm CEO of Mark Development. We've been using the program for a long time. I'm not going to try and reiterate all the things that I agree with that all the previous testifiers said, but maybe talk in some bigger, broader strokes. You know, I mean, we submitted testimonies saying how the design standards are duplications and kind of stupid. But I'm concerned about the bigger direction of the agency in implementing this program. And I understand that there are outside forces, not outside forces. You know, I'm at the age now where I lose my filters. And so I'm just gonna call out, you know, call it what it is. And Senator Stanley Chang has solicited and tried to have, you know, this boilerplate testimony submitted. And I've read the testimony and there are so many inaccuracies and falsehoods in it. I want to encourage the staff and the decision makers to ignore this. It is a load of crap. So said it. I like Stanley Chang as a person. He is so wrong and he does not understand this what the developers have to do and what is entailed in this development process. So having said that, cleared that out of the way. One of my other big concerns is the concept that HHFDC in implementing the QAP and the tax credit program is creating a race to the bottom, is what we've kind of coined it in our office. You want to award more points for the lowest cost per unit, and yet you get dismayed when your developers can't meet the budgets that they submitted. You know, and part of that is the inflationary costs in recent years, but a lot of it is you're encouraging the developers to build less quality to meet the price goals that you are stating. And I understand you want to leverage, you know, your resources, but what you're going to end up doing in this race to the bottom is you're going to create slums. Mark Development is a little bit different than most of the other developers because we do property management as well, only low-income housing properties. And so as developers, we have that in our minds when we're designing and programming our projects. We try and build projects that are of good quality, that have better maintenance features, easier to maintain, longer lasting, more durable to the wear and tear of low-income housing living from the tenants that we have. But we're not rewarded for that. We're actually penalized for that in the QAP. And you need to consider what you're doing. Well, maybe you're getting better leverage out of your monies, out of your tax credits. You're going to create projects that are going to fall apart faster and sooner, and they're going to look like they're going to look bad. You're going to create slums, which goes to another point: this concept of in perpetuity of affordability. We all want affordable housing, but requiring it to be in perpetuity, like that law that was ill-advisedly passed that ties the rent house revolving fund to in perpetuity affordable housing, is not a good idea. You guys aren't just financiers of affordable housing. You need to put on your social engineering hats and your planning hats and say, 60 years from now, if this project is all of a sudden become part of a gentrified community, or if a rail is running through it, you know, is this the best, highest and used product for this property? It needs to be recapitalized. Okay, but if it's tied into a in perpetuity deed restriction, no one's going to come in and put the money into it. And then again, you're going to create slums. Okay, so you have to have deeper thinking than just, oh, we're trying to leverage our money. Okay, that is short-sighted thinking, and we'll all be dead. But 60 years from now, they're going to say, who created this slum over here? Okay, And investors aren't going to want to invest in it either. If they're like, wow, we got a product that we're investing in a product that's not going to produce quality housing that could be higher risk for the investors. So that's one of the important things I want to say. And along those concepts also, and in defense of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, we built 20 years ago, Chair Watson and I had the opportunity, he gave me the opportunity to develop the first affordable housing tax credit project on Hawaiian Homelands. And it was with single family homes. 20 years ago, I could compete with the QAP and it was hard. But we managed, there wasn't as much competition and we managed to get an award for tax credits to do that project. Today, I could never compete with single family homes against multifamily homes because the standard of measurement is what? Cost per unit, not cost per bedroom. In Hawaiian Homelands projects, doing single family homes, low-income housing tax credits, I am housing more number of people that are low-income families. Okay. You might have 75 studios taking care of 75 seniors in one project. When I built 75 3 and 4 bedroom homes, I'm housing 300, 400 people that needed affordable housing, families. Okay. But there's no credit for that in the way that you're directing the award of the funds. And I think that needs to be considered. Otherwise, Hawaiian Homes is not going to have a chance under this, the way that the direction is going now. So, and I think those are important because our poor people, our poor families are not limited to, one person households or 2-person households. We have a lot of larger families and we are not directing any kind of resources towards building larger units. Okay, so I want to I say that I think the QAP needs to consider that and give heavy consideration to that because it's a section of our community that is being left out. And let's see, what else did I have? Everybody said everything else already. So that's kind of what I want to say. It's conceptual in nature, but I think the powers that be, I hope you guys will consider that. And yeah, so thank you.
Thank you, Craig. We're going to proceed with those who have signed up to testify. And if there's anyone else who didn't sign up that would like to testify, we will take your testimony at the end. I'm going to move over to those who are joining us remotely. First, like to ask Doug Bigley from Ikaika Ohana for his testimony. Thank you for your patience, everyone.
Hi, David. This is Doug Bigley. Can you hear me, David?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I guess the first thing I would like to address is some of the comments that it was Craig Witasi made earlier. I would just like to say ditto.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, I think he actually, I think if, I'm going to present a few things here, but I think people are going to think I'm working for him. So, because we think very alike in this space and for a lot of different reasons. And I've had, testimony many times on a few topics. So I'm going to just hit high level. First of all, I am going to speak to what he said with the comments by this Stanley Chang. And I want to talk a little bit more about into perpetuity for a minute. And I think the big thing that Craig said that I want to dovetail off of is that my experience with the state of Hawaii and with the legislature themselves is we have, the state of Hawaii has into perpetuity housing, that's called public housing. That is into perpetuity housing. And they have almost $1 billion gap now. And if you just think to all the projects that get funded at the state that are, people are literally living in substandard conditions in those projects, but in defense of the legislature, they have needs of equal merit. So what they're going to do is say, okay, well, I'm, like food, I've got, hurricanes and stuff like that. And I think the pieces that someone like the senator is not putting together is the fact that unless there's a threat of the project leaving the affordable stuff, it does not get attention. I think Craig mentioned that. And that's what happens. And I'm saying the legislature has to fix their piece before they throw this stuff out. Because I understand a desire to have into perpetuity, but we all die. And so do projects. And at some point they need the funding. So they'll say, and this is why things tie into my, some of the worst stewards of housing are agencies, both states, counties, and if you look at it, a lot of the agencies are divesting of housing. And then I see in this QAP things like, I think I saw one section where it says, we're going to basically give 10 points for deep rehab. That's a public housing problem. So what we're saying here in this QAP is that's a priority for us. That's what we're going to do. And I'll get to my overall point in a minute. But so basically this program was designed to help working families. That was the genesis of, the tax credit program, and it's been wildly successful. And so what's happened is all these other special interest or special use people have used it. I understand that, you have people that are talking about special needs today. You have, the DHHL has come in today and said, yeah, we're doing all this great stuff. We're housing a lot of people, but we don't have enough money. So we're turning to this tax credit program, right? And then we say, okay, I have a special needs situation, and we should be housing the very most people in need, right? Most people in need. And that always has a great ring to it, because what we're saying is, I do believe that defines us, but in a way, who defines need? If you talk to Callie, the need's going to be Native Hawaiians, because he's that advocate. And if you talk to public housing people, they're going to say that's the people that are most in need. If you talk to the other woman who gave testimony, she's going to say it's special needs people, and nobody's getting adequate attention. But what makes this program unique is, again, originally it was designed, and for Hawaii's, one of the basic needs Hawaii has is it's losing its working families. They're leaving the island, and they're an economic engine, and they're seeking opportunities elsewhere because they want to find housing. And so what I'm suggesting here is that this program, the uniqueness of this program, it isn't exclusive to any special needs, but it's going to serve all special needs. In all of our housing, we have people who are on spectrum. We have veterans. Native Hawaiians are welcome in this program. This is a program for people a lot of the people that suffer in silence. It's like, it wasn't meant to fix public housing. It was an alternative to public housing.
Right.
So what I'm suggesting is that when we write these QAPs, to start with organizing priorities. What is this program meant, and what is it supposed to serve, and how is it supposed to serve? So in that context, if we go back to the beginning and we say the highest need for this thing is to make sure that we're stemming the flow of people who are exiting the island. The group that suffers in silence because they don't have time to show up at hearings because they have 3 jobs. They're absentee mothers. They're elderly that are living in depression because they don't have services. All of that is served in the context of this tax credit program. So if we go back and we say, I'm going to evaluate all my scoring criteria off of what my principles are, and I'm going to say, hey, we want to serve working families first, the ones that fit into kind of this income class, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're going to eliminate as much bureaucracy as we can. And let me talk about readiness really quickly, because a lot of people talk about readiness. Readiness does 2 things that we have to consider when we consider readiness. One, it's extremely costly. So if the agency, HHFGC, is not committed to a project early on, there might be all of these guys that are talking right now that are saying, hey, readiness, I really want to keep that 201H in play. Well, yeah, but that means you're going to spend a lot of money on a project that may never get funded. So the question isn't how much can we do? It's how much don't we have to do before we go. If someone goes all the way to building permits, it's crazy. If they don't have a commitment from the agency that says this is a project that we want to do. Otherwise, the private sector is just wasting money. So the more clear the agency is about what their priorities are, it means all of the community, all the private sector is going to get energy towards the things that have priority. Now, I mentioned the irony also of the fact that there's a couple of points in here for saying that the bad stewards of, housing, that we wanted to privatize housing because the private sector, we may not set all your priorities, but we're really good at housing. We're really good at this. But what we're saying is at the end of this, whatever 15 years, you're going to get extra points to sell the housing to the group that is now asking us to fix their housing. I don't get that kind of irony. And I believe there's a lot of work to do here to kind of get this thing organized because I can't even really, when I read this, I don't know what we're trying to do here yet. It's just because we have conflicting priorities. Let me give you an example. You're lowering the income. You're saying we are going to give points for you to lower the affordability, but then we're going to penalize you if you can't pay off your loan. Well, that's kind of a contradiction because if you lower the guys who can't pay off the loan. So there's all that kind of stuff that's going on here because it's not well organized. Okay. We haven't decided what the priorities are yet. We're going for whoever's, I guess, supposedly the loudest voice. But point is, the other thing is a couple of things. The agency should be massively concerned with the health of the developing community. That means stop not paying them. Say what I don't see anything here that says what's reasonable to pay. I just see we're throwing out numbers and saying, well, we'll see how many people apply, and that means it's okay. No, that's not really the case. There's a tremendous amount of responsibility for the agency to protect the development community and make sure that they're healthy and make sure that the riskiest developers aren't getting the deals because they're willing to back into an application. We're actually seeing right now the consequences of what we talked about. I think, David, we had talked about it a year or two ago, is that because I'm going to talk about Craig again. Because what I'm saying is I brought up this point about making some per bedroom or some of the metrics, we were considered an outlier because everyone else, there were people that got awards that were willing to have units that were, I think, less than 300 units and no parking, hardly any parking. And that could have been foreseen because if you say, I'm going to do it on a per unit basis, let's get rid of the parking and get our units as small as we can. And most of the allocations went to, we talked about this. You have your 2 bedrooms and then you have one bedrooms and studios. And it's a surprise to everybody, but that's what you asked people to do in that application. And there's reasons why that happened. I think I sent a memo to you on that earlier. What you have in this application doesn't fix that problem. So what Craig's talking about hasn't been fixed here. You're going to have 2 bedrooms, 1 bedrooms, and you have more 2 bedrooms and then 1 bedrooms and studios. That's what this application says now. So I think we do have to do a lot of work to kind of define what we're looking at. And what I mean about going back real quick to take care of the developer, make sure they're liquid. Make sure they can meet their demands in the future. I gave you guys a memo, a write-up that said, here in California, we give additional federal tax credits or bond deals at 8609. They've done that for years. So I don't really fully understand why the agency doesn't make that act. We've lived through a fire, we've lived through COVID. Why isn't that a provision in the document right now? Why are you saying for people who haven't filed an 8609, we will give you additional credits, federal credits, without any concern? It doesn't come from any state resources, but it's something you could do for the development community that says, without harming us at the state level, we're going to give you additional federal credit. So if you get to 8609 and you went over budget, now you can't pass you can't go exceed the 50% test, but you can give extra federal credits a lot of people are doing it. We've been doing it for years here in California. I really don't understand like why that one just isn't like a de facto we'll do it. Because the people that you're looking around the room right there are your partners. And we're your partner. You have an awesome responsibility and you're taking a good cut at this. But I'm just trying to say that in certain areas where you guys can give this community relief, then we can work together and things that don't harm us. I mean, would actually benefit us. It's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing that you're saying, hey, I'm concerned about the developers and trying to make sure that the guys are getting enough liquidity so they can do the next job, the next deal. So anyway, I'll leave it at that because I'm putting together, my testimony, but I had real difficulty kind of like Craig because it kind of like it's loose here. I don't really understand what your priorities are. And the more clear you guys are on what your priorities are, and the more you state them clearly to say, but if you said a bailout of public housing is our priority, because when you're giving 10 points for these deep rehabs, that's public housing. That's the benefit. You're going to crowd out a lot of the people that are supposed to be beneficiaries of this program, right? But you might as well tell me now, because then the guys who have already received allocation from HPA and land and building, they'll be the guys that are the players the next couple of years, and we can go do something else until you've met that priority. If that's the priority, I'm just saying, let's say it so that the rest of us can put our resources to other things or other states perhaps that don't have these criteria, if that makes sense. I mean, do us at least, maybe extend us that favor. So anyway, really appreciate the work that you guys have done. And I appreciate a lot of the developers that you have on the island. I think they do a wonderful job. And Craig, when the next time I get over there, call you because we're like-minded. So I really appreciate everything. Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you, Doug. Next up, again, thank you everyone for your patience waiting. We have Makani Maeva from the AHI Group. That's fine. Makani, you can unmute yourself and see.
Hi, good morning. Coming to you from my car in Hilo. We submitted extensive testimony, written testimony before the deadline, so it is public. We feel strongly about many of the things that have been previously raised. I was trying to text Doug Bigley to say, ditto to him. So I don't want to repeat and I don't want to waste your time, but it is very, very important that the Housing Finance Agency identify what your real goals are. And I agree with Doug, like if it is just a bailout of public housing, if all of the priorities, all of the scores are going to go to government owned properties and to the, stated, I don't know, Kale Momi project or whatever, then we just really need to understand, is that one agency of the housing of the state of Hawaii who has, oh, can you not hear me?
I don't know. I'm just turning it up.
Okay. Is that one agency of the state of Hawaii's priority? Because the Housing Finance Agency has one goal, which is to facilitate affordable housing. And the Hawaii Public Housing Authority has another goal, which is specifically asset management of public housing. And I agree there are two different piles of tenant, there's two different tenant profiles there. I'm deeply offended by the characterizations of Senator Stanley Chang and this program in general. It is one of the greatest producers of affordable housing. It has brought the private sector, corporations, into a space, and they're investing in affordable housing at a rapid level and housing people all over the country. So to engage in disinformation about this being some sort of boondoggle, some sort of, pile of riches we've just happened upon is absolutely disingenuous and doesn't represent, I don't think, the people of Hawaii who are living in these buildings. We are prepared as an experienced affordable housing developer to make the proper investment. And if building permits is what you want and you identify what those projects look like, we will make the investment because we believe in affordable housing. But this direction in this qualified allocation plan is no direction. It is very simply a splattering of ideas, a smattering of ideas. And we appreciate at Ahe Group all of the work that everybody does, but we do think that there are a lot of areas where there's digging too deep in the very specifics of a project, and there are contrary goals in these in this allocation plan. So I'm not going to repeat all of the questions that we had. I just want you to know that if you give us clear direction, we are here to work with you hand in hand to make sure that that we can deliver the housing that you want to have built. Thanks.
Thank you, Makani. Appreciate your testimony. I'm going to move on now to those who may not have signed up but are in attendance. If you are remote right now, please make yourself recognized. If you're on Teams, just please raise your hand and we will recognize you, but we will recognize those in attendance in person first. Is there anyone in person in the audience who would like to offer additional testimony on QAP? Hearing none, is there anyone online who would like to provide testimony for the QAP for this public hearing? Hi, Allison. Thank you. Thank you. You can proceed.
Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to review the QAP as well. And we know that you have put a lot of work into this and into the program, and we appreciate your partnership. I just wanted to chime in on a couple of thoughts that CREA had from the perspective of the investors that we work with. And some of it is going to be repeating what the developers have already noted. But one of the things that we see in the updates to the QAP is a real focus on the additional construction requirements, whether it be sort of investment in properties that are in need of rehabilitation or some of the additional construction requirements. We are definitely seeing an increase in the total cost per unit in the state of Hawaii, and it's been challenging for us to manage that additional cost, just at large amounts of equity. And I know that in some respects you're trying to address that, you know, with your request to also have sort of a maximum. But just in our experience, you know, developers have done a really great job of sort of determining what the project needs, and that could be, you know, additional environmental solar panels or, you know, LEED certified properties, things of that nature that our investors definitely want to see. But we just worry about having another layer of requirements, you know, in the QAP that adds an additional burden and an additional expense to the properties as they're already so, you know, expensive and the cost per unit in the state is so high. So we would just sort of caution against that. And I think someone said, you know, maybe having a 2-year lead time that maybe allows people to kind of work through that in a cost efficient way, and something that allows them the time as well, just given how much they have to do on the front end to be able to submit an application. And then the second piece of that is also the look at reducing developer fee. You know, as an investor, we really rely on developer fee as a way of addressing concerns. And, you know, a lot of states that we work in have a different way of calculating developer fee for 4% transactions. It gives them a little bit higher of a allowable fee. And when you have a lower fee, you know, that immediately sort of increases the amount that's deferred. And CREA's preference is generally that there's no more than 50% of the fee deferred. And so if you reduce the overall fee, immediately it's going to be a higher deferred fee. And for example, we have one investor that asked for at least 10% of cash development, or excuse me, of the permanent loan amount to be available in cash development fee. And on some deals that I've looked at recently, like total development fee, not just what's cash, is less than that requirement. So it just puts us in a bind when there's not as much development fee available. And a lot of our clients are, struggling with all of the upfront investment costs just to get to the point of applying. So those are sort of the big things that we see. And I just wanted to provide that context, and I will also submit a written summary as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Allison. Appreciate hearing from you. Is there anybody else on the phone before I recognize those online that would like to testify? Okay, hearing none. I'll move to those.
We would like to testify if we could.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Aloha, thank you. This is Hakeem Wansafi, the Executive Director for the Hawaii Public Housing Authority. Aloha, and thank you for this opportunity to share our thoughts on the proposed 2025 QAP. Our testimony today highlights several areas where we believe a thoughtful adjustment of the QAP could greatly benefit large-scale new build development. But before I summarize our written testimony and to clarify, HPHA's mission extends far beyond simply managing units, as some might misunderstand. While the HPHA does not apply for credits specifically for rehab, like some developers do, we do pursue LIHTC, just like other developers, to build new affordable housing in collaboration with great developer partners. Our goal is to create sustainable, affordable housing options that serve Hawaii community comprehensively. The primary purpose of low-income tax credit, as you know, is to stimulate private investment in affordable rental housing that meets the needs for low-income households and supports the goal by promoting affordable housing availability, fostering community development through mixed income communities, and ensuring long-term affordability commitments. This program is instrumental in developing sustainable, diverse communities to address critical housing needs, specifically in high-cost area where affordable housing is limited. First, we would like to recommend introducing a greater flexibility in QAP timing requirements and cost structures. For example, extended the deadline for preliminary engineering report and adjusting debt service coverage ratio would better support the complex phase project that require comprehensive planning and secure financing over multiple years. Additionally, raising the developer fee cap will ensure that large-scale project with hundreds of units and thousands of units can remain financially viable, aligning with HUD's Safe Harbor guideline, which recognizes the complexities inherent in such development. To promote social equity, we urge the inclusion of additional scoring points for projects that actively work to deconcentrate poverty and prioritize units for extremely low-income housing, particularly those below 30% EMI, because they too need housing. This focus will allow Hawaii to better serve our utmost vulnerable residents and to foster diverse, inclusive communities. Additionally, we recommend addressing the current rating methodology, which scores projects based on per unit allocation. This approach inadvertently discourages developers from including large units such as 4 and 5 bedroom apartments, which are critically needed by large families within our community. Shifting to a model that provides incentive for larger units would allow developers to better meet the needs for those families without sacrificing competitiveness in the scoring. In terms of financial sustainability, we strongly support the adoption of the income averaging in the QAP. Income averaging enables the developers to include a wide range of income levels within a single development, with units targeted from 30 to 80% EMI. This approach not only ensures that extremely low-income households are included, but also creates a financially balanced model where market rates and higher AMI units help cross-subsidize the lowest income units. This model aligns closely with HUD's goals of supporting mixed income developments and would create a more resilient communities across the state. Further, we believe that QAP would benefit from allowing a proportion of market units, as this aligns with the best practices nationwide for sustainable affordable housing. Market units being they bring financial stability and promote community integration by supporting mixed income models where affordable housing units are distinguished from others, ensuring inclusivity for both the design and the experience and deconcentrating the poverty. On operational concerns, we recommend clarifying the definitions around vertical and non-vertical construction costs to better support projects with mixed use or complex site constraints such as parking podiums or retail spaces. Additionally, publishing the list of approved construction estimators well in advance will provide the developers the lead time needed to engage qualified professionals without conflicts of interest. In conclusion, these recommendations focus on flexibility, social equity, financial stability, and operational clarity will enable the QAP to more effectively support large-scale transformative projects that address Hawaii's needs, and these needs are urgent, as you know. By prioritizing income averaging, mixed income scoring incentive, and low-income household support, we can ensure that Hawaii's affordable housing development are inclusive, resilient, and economically viable for decades to come. I do want to thank you for your hard work and your team that we can see from what you have proposed, and we look forward to collaborating and strengthening the QAP to better serve our communities. Thank you again for your time. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Director. Anybody else online who would like to offer testimony? Hearing none. Last call for anyone in person. Anyone on the phone would like to provide testimony? Any remaining people to provide testimony? We have one more person signed up. Mark, are you there? Did you want to say a few words?
I'm here, yes.
Go ahead and introduce for the group.
Indeed, Mark Selburn. I'm with Nova Granic, but here today in capacity as consultant to HHFDC. This is actually now this is the 20th state where I've worked on a QAP, and so I've been very much enjoying this. And but I definitely need to say that I am pretty much guaranteed to blame for basically anything that y'all don't like in this document. So that's one of my functions, is to be to blame for these things, but it also happens to be true. So I have a few responses to some of the main points that came up today. So I won't take the time to cover everything. And I haven't vetted anything I'm about to say with staff. These are just my own personal reactions, just trying to help advance the discussion, help advance understanding, so that we can have a better way of moving forward with what is truly a collaborative document. It's pretty remarkable in the policy world to have such a collaborative thing as the QAP. So as got a few couple high level, and one and several specific comments. The most important specific one I'll get to towards the end is some inaccuracies, a big inaccuracy with regard to the policy on persons with disabilities. But We'll start with a high level thought, which is that I totally get that changes close to an application deadline can be challenging. I've been on the other end of that. And so that is a very real phenomenon that we get, but it also can't at the same time be the reason for stagnation in developing the way policies work. That is a recipe for programs becoming, having problems and becoming irrelevant. And specifically in Hawaii, to my knowledge, is the last state to adopt design requirements for average income. And so I get that at least the former of those may need some more time, but if you got 49 states with design standards, then that suggests that the 50th probably should at least consider it. And so that takes us to the cost policy. When I first looked at this document, one of my main reactions was to be, really no other word but surprised at the extent to which it involved policies which are a race to the bottom. There are several of them that encourage, reward developers for saying their project is going to cost less. And so the draft proposes a really multi-pronged, but mainly two-pronged approach to dealing with that circumstance. The first is to get rid of those policies. And as you'll note, no one has had a problem with those deletions, like criteria 1 and 2. I haven't seen anyone or heard anyone that have an objection to getting rid of those scoring criteria. But the corresponding aspect of that is the proposal of the limit on cost for the vertical component. And the idea behind that is to allow an update, a real time as possible, and nuanced, sophisticated, could address different kinds of projects in different ways, and to have it reflect the fact that those are the costs that are the least variable, at least compared to land and site work. But I get that as a concept, it may be too much to adopt in the time that's available. So it may be that the preference, again, of this consensus document is to keep the race to the bottom criteria, because you can't have a QAP with no cost policy. That's, at least to my, I don't know of any state that does that. I think that would be seen by a lot of third parties as irresponsible. So we need something, and there's really never a good answer on cost policy. It's one of the few areas where any solution is going to have a problem. You just kind of have to pick one. So moving on to another widely discussed topic today, developer fee. In every state where I've worked, whenever there's a proposal about the developer fee, there's always a reaction that, of course, the proposal is meant to be a reduction in the amount. And sometimes it is, but that's not the case here. The goal here is to come up with a calculation method that has a rational basis. And so the notion of a per unit amount is a recommended practice of the National Council of State Housing Agency, because it avoids what the percent of cost does, which is reward and efficiency. And so you produce the same unit and spend more to do it, then you earn more fee. And that's not something that, again, third parties would consider to have a rational basis. And so that's the goal. It's not to reduce the amount of the fee. And so I know HHFDC is wide open to input on how to come up with numbers or calculation methods that do have a solid rational basis. And so that brings me to my last specific comment, which is on the notion of persons with disabilities. So the draft absolutely does not end tenants' eligibility to live in these units. That's just simply not true. And it couldn't even be true even if an agency wanted to. Agencies don't have that authority. That's a fair housing circumstance. What the draft does is changes point scoring, which again is not eligibility to move into the units. And what it does is it changes the point scoring to be based on a third-party standard. as opposed to standards which could be based on the owner and management company needing to know medical information about the tenants, which a lot of people consider to be not necessarily best practice. And so we absolutely can debate that as to whether it's good or not good to have, again, an independent third-party determination of disability status. But to say that any particular group is no longer eligible to live in these units, again, it's just simply wrong. So that's not helpful. And as a last general thought, sometimes what look like conflicting goals, sometimes they just are. But in other cases, what they are is different opportunities to score points for projects that are in different circumstances, which can be a good thing. So that, again, my own thoughts, haven't vetted them all, any of them with David or the others there at HCFTC. And happy to take any reactions or questions. I'm up to David, but thanks.
Thank you, Mark. If there's nobody out there with testimony, we welcome all your, any additional comments or feedback just provided to myself or staff. Thank you all for your attendance and your patience and your contributions to this process. Myself and staff deeply appreciative of our collaboration and partnership with you folks, and we look forward to more. I have to say, this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.